Swinburne University of Technology.
Hi postgraduate students, I'm Dr. Josie Arnold, Professor of Writing, and today I'm talking to Associate Professor Christine Critchley from Statistics and Psychology. There's a mix. Christine, tell me, most psychology students would be really familiar with statistics?
Yes, they are. They do it right from first year, in fact, and I think that pretty much comes from the whole profession of psychology emphasising that it's a science. So the scientist practitioner model is very strong in the profession, and part of that science, part of it is being good at doing research and analysing data or patterns in things, whether it be qualitative interviews or trying to reduce human attributes to numbers and then analysing them. So they pretty much get it from first year right through and into postgraduate as well. And it's part of obviously the psychology degree is accredited by an outside body, the Australian Psychological Accreditation Council, and they require us to teach statistics because it's part of this scientist practitioner model.
And you obviously see great value in it. Could you talk to me about that a bit?
Well, I see great value in it, but I also see the pitfalls. So it's depending on what you're doing. So if you're doing an experimental piece of research, or you're doing a survey or a longitudinal analysis and you think it's appropriate to measure, you're able to measure things, then statistics is a classic way that you can actually analyse your patterns and see if they fit your hypotheses or your research questions. So it's a really useful tool, but it can have, it depends what you're using it for. It's not suitable for everything. So it's suitable for when you think you can measure things. Well, in psychology it's human emotions, thought or behaviours, which is a challenge to reduce to numbers, but I like that challenge, and that challenge in itself is a big area of study in psychology. And that's how I kind of got into it and was interested in it, because I was interested in the challenge. How do you measure people? Because people are quite complex. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
yes, you did. And statistics, then, would you see that as a numeric narrative in some way?
Yes, absolutely. Well, you're telling a story. It is like telling a story, but you're telling it in numbers, and more specifically patterns. Like you're looking at what could, you've got a data file with all these numbers in it on the surface that could look random, and your task as a researcher or a quantitative researcher, if you're using statistics, is to understand the pattern and tell a story from the pattern. And that's one thing that I really enjoy and like, is being able to make sense of the numbers, tell a story from it. What's it mean? What's it telling me? What can I learn? What knowledge am I contributing by what I'm finding out, whether that be a small set of numbers from a small sample or a huge data set, like telecom data, or Telstra data, I should say. Telecom's a bit old. Yeah, Telstra data, or online shopping data, whatever when you've got masses of data and it's all chaotic, but telling a story out of that is really valuable and enjoyable.
Is it difficult to find patterns in such statistical analysis of big data like that?
Absolutely. I mean, my experience is more with the small, psychology tends to do more, sample. If you've got a sample of 1,000 people, that's considered fairly large, so I'm used to the more focused studies like experiments and surveys and that sort of thing. So that can be a challenge too, depends what you're doing with it. But with the big data, it's a huge issue now in statistics, is how to make sense of all of this seemingly random data. How do you make sense of people's Medicare practices, for example, and what prescriptions they have fulfilled, and how all that data, how do you make sense of that? So that it's still a new and developing field of actually what analytic techniques to use for that sort of big data. So it's still growing and developing, and every year there's new software, new techniques coming out. But my area is the more traditional scientist sort of area, and that's fairly established.
So talk to me about that. What would you say to your postgraduate students about that?
About
the established?
Well, even the established statistics, there's there's so much to learn. I'm continuously learning. I've been doing it for, I said just before to someone, 30 years.
Goodness.
And you never know everything.
No,
there's always something to learn. There's always something being developed. But there's a kind of toolkit bag of the classic ones that every researcher are good to know, because it's not just about learning one or two statistical techniques. The whole sort of value of it is knowing a range, so you then know, like you've got a toolkit, you've got a research question in your research that you want to answer, so part of the skill is being able to identify which technique best fits my research question, and that's a skill in itself, because you need to know a variety of things to make that decision, and that's probably the most valuable thing to have, is just at least a vague knowledge that there are things out there, and then if you need it, you can go and learn it.
So how would your postgraduate students come to their research question, do you?
Oh, in all different ways. Some students have a burning question they want to have answered that they've been interested in for many years, or they've got a personal interest in, whatever, and they'll come to you and they'll say, oh, Christine, I want to have a look at how having a premature child affects mother's emotional state, for example, right, because they've had experience with prematurity or whatever. So there's that type. Then there are others who don't really have a clear idea. They might have a vague idea. I'm interested in people's social political attitudes, for example, and then you sort of help narrow them down and try and drag out of them, well, what aspect of that are you interested in? And so all different ways. A lot of students are quite anxious that their topic helps them get a job at the end of the day, and I can understand that, so they'll want to know what's useful for me to do my topic on. And I know there's people disagree, but I tend to prefer them to do something they're passionate about or very interested in, but not to the point where they're dogmatic about it, where they're then unable to be more objective, because of course doing scientific research you've got to try to be objective, and it's really hard when you're a human being yourself and you're studying other human beings. There's all sorts of stuff that can affect your biases, and we teach students about that. So it's not just about the statistics, it's all about the scientific method as well. So
if a student came to you then, say, with a question about prematurity,
mm-hmm.
would they interview, how would they get their statistics?
Oh, well, I have actually had a student who's done that, so I can actually answer. Well, it depends on the research question. So if they wanted to look at something quite complex and that hasn't been much research done on it before, then qualitative research might be the way to go, where they interview, say, parents who have had a premature child and ask about their experience, whatever it is that they're interested in. Or they might, as my student did, have a pre-existing research question. So what she did was developed a measure to assess, and it was basically at the end of the day to look at how preoccupied parents are with their newborn babies, and her hypothesis was that having a premature child might disrupt that natural anxieties that you have as a new mother. Right. So she had to develop a measure herself, because there'd been interviews developed before, so she was interested in collecting data on a largish sample. So for that you need quantitative research, and reducing things to numbers is a bit more practical than doing 500 interviews, which take a long time. But she developed the measure to measure these preoccupations with the newborn, and then she tested it on, she had a sample, I can't remember the number, but she basically had a sample of parents, or mostly mothers, well in fact all mothers, because it was about maternal bonding and preoccupations with the child. So she had, I think, 200 parents, mothers who had had a premature child and currently had a young infant, I think up to 6 months of age. And then she also gave this measure, and with a whole lot of other measures as well, to a sample of women that had full-term babies to compare. So she's sort of had a control group.
Excellent. So when your students use statistics, where do they focus their work for contribution to knowledge?
Well, focusing, did you say when they're developing their research question?
Yeah.
Well, that's a huge part of doing a PhD. I mean, that's
right.
one of the requirements. You have to contribute new knowledge in whatever way. So that's a central thing that we'll talk through when we're planning what the student will do. You know, how are you going to contribute to what's already out there? And most students that I've had do, because most of them have their own sort of spin or view. You can always do something different,
Yes.
you know. Sometimes it might be you're doing research in an area that no one's even done any research, that's completely new. That can be challenging for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it might be building on an incremental you know, contribution to knowledge and a huge body of work in an area that's already been researched, but you're doing something different. You know, you're looking at a different variable or different thing that no one else has looked at. You're looking at a different sample. You're doing it in a different way. You might be doing a different methodology. There's always something you can do new. So
in writing up, would there be a lot of tabular representations generally or not?
Tables,
yeah.
You mean? Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If you're doing a quantitative project with statistics, you definitely have to have lots of tables. Well, it depends, you know, the extent of it, but you do have tables, figures, you might have diagrams depending on the stats that you do, charts, all sorts of things. That, in fact, that's a really interesting area. Just displaying statistics is a skill as well. So, and I like doing that because I'm a bit frustrated artist, a little bit. So I just like, you know, mapping things is really exciting. I mean, it depends on the data that you've got. That will dictate how you represent it. Yeah.
So in writing up a traditional thesis, would you follow a certain model in psychology of, say, introduction, balances,
absolutely.
The conclusion? Well, would you like to talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. Well, in psychology, again, going back to this scientist practitioner model, yes, you do statistics, yes, you learn about research methodology, but you also learn about this thing called the American Psychological Association's formatting requirements.
Yep.
So APA requirements, and there's a manual on it, and it's all about learning how to write in a scientific style. And of course there are different scientific styles. This is just one of a few. So our students learn that, and yes, you're expected to write in that format in a PhD. You still have a bit of creativity in there. You don't have to, it's not, every section's not dictated. It depends on the topic that you're doing as well. So, but at the end of the day, they have to have roughly, you know, like a theoretical literature review, which is usually labelled an introduction, but that might be 4 chapters, 5 chapters, depends on the topic.
Yes.
And then you'll have a methodology section where you describe how you've measured things, whether you've developed measures, whether you know, how did you interview people, if you interviewed people, what were your participants or respondents, who were they, what the characteristics of them, how did you get them, recruit them. Then you'll have a results section where you will write up, that's where your tables and your figures and things like that will go. And then you have a discussion where you talk about, well, what did you find, how does that link into previous knowledge and literature, what have you found that's new, what were the problems, all that sort of thing. So roughly speaking, it's that kind of format.
And that doesn't
structure.
just come about at the postgraduate level, does it?
No.
It's been built up in undergraduate honours or masters.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's a model that's been very dominant and probably remains dominant in quantitative psychological.
It is the model.
Yeah.
It is dominant, yeah. So a lot of students struggle with that idea that it's highly structured. And it's very similar to other disciplines, not just psychology, a lot of other disciplines.
It's the traditional PhD model, isn't it?
Yeah. So, but you can be quite creative within that, and I suppose personal preference, but I liked it when I was learning it because it told me what goes where. Like, I liked having that structure, and then I could be creative within that structure. So it's
not prescriptive, but it's bordered, and very much you fill in those sections that you're expected to fill in.
Yes.
But within that, you can have a style of writing and get yourself across in some ways, I suppose.
Yes, everyone has a different style of writing. So it's not really... Sometimes the style of writing is a bit influenced by the structure. They like short, sharp to the... Well, PhD is a bit different. You can be a bit more unique there, but publishing, because words are limited, obviously, you've got to be very efficient with your words. But no, people can... All different styles of writing. It's...
Christine, can you explain to me why you're so passionate about statistics?
I just think it's fun. Well, I love finding out things, and I've always liked solving puzzles like crosswords, and I love computer games, and I'm fascinated with people. And so I get real enjoyment out of this whole thing that I was talking about before, about finding the story or the meaning in the chaos. That gives me great pleasure, but I want to contribute, find useful things that are going to help our knowledge about people, so that ultimately policy, whatever, programs, treatments, whatever, can be developed from that knowledge that actually at the end of the day help people. So it sort of merges all my passions together in a way.
And I guess there have been a lot of new electronic programs that are helping statistical modelling now?
Oh, absolutely. There's so many. I mean, we tend to, this university and most universities, you start off learning the dominant sort of statistical package, but there's so many out there that do a whole variety of things. It depends on the statistics that you're using. So there's all sorts of programs for a whole variety of things. It's a huge industry. And our program is specially designed for the social sciences. You know, there's others that are sort of more designed for business,
right,
or other areas. So,
well, Christine, I didn't think I'd ever meet anyone who's a poet in statistics, but here she is. So thank you very much for coming along today, and I hope you found it useful and interesting to see how the traditional qualitative methodologies of statistics are so important in psychology, postgraduate work and publishing work. Thanks again.
Thanks, Josie.
This has been a Swinburne production.